So we're here in downtown Ghent, in the square of the old city. Not too far from here is the Orpheus Institute, where we've been having a research festival on artistic experimentation in music. Our colleagues at the Orpheus Institute have brought together scholars from around the world who are discussing what the nature of experimental work is in the arts, in music, composition, performance, and thinking about music, music research, particularly developing a practice-based research in music. And you'll hear a bit more about that in this film.
Orpheus Research Center is, in a way, a unique research center. It was launched as Europe's first research center fully dedicated to artistic research in music. And what do we mean by this artistic research in music? That is a research that, first of all, takes the perspective of the artist, but the research questions arise from the musical practice, the art practice itself. For us as musicians, that means performing or composing or articulating and manipulating sound, for example. And the output of this research flows back into that same practice. So in a way, we might say musician researchers attempt to touch the mysterious genesis of the music itself. As musicians, we discovered to our astonishment that we were missing a discourse around us about music that took the perspective of the artist. We were surrounded by many high-level discussions about what music might be from different perspectives, the perspective of music sociology, music philosophy, musicology, but we were still missing actually the perspective of the artist. We want to create a language, a discourse, using concepts that construct a humus layer for artistic research. And that is new. The act of playing, the act of making music is not new. The act of doing research from different perspectives into the subject or the topic or the phenomenon of music is not new. But what is new is bringing them together and when we say we take the perspective of the artist, actually what we want to reach is to study or to research the processes of music making, what lies under the surface of what we as consumers of music, for example, do not touch normally.
I haven't seen a flavor like this one. I mean, obviously, artists all over the world do research. That's synonymous with what they do. That is their fabric of their life. And we may call it many different things, but we're talking about the same thing. But I haven't seen a kind of an institutional approach like this one in the States. There are other really interesting ones, interdisciplinary places, places where artists from different disciplines are thrown together in a kind of a melting pot. But this has a very explicit goal and purpose. I don't know of a place in the States like this.
When we started 3 years ago, we got into a lot of debates and discussions about the larger field that we call artistic research. Some of our colleagues call it research in and through musical practice. There are lots of different names. And although we got very interested in these debates and had some good discussions, sometimes it was hard for us to focus our thinking in a way that was really going to help and inform our musical practice. We flew off into very abstract realms. When we started to think about if we consider experimentation within that practice, immediately it gives us this kind of catalyst to focus back down into the performing, into the playing, into the practice that is listening, into the practice that is being a poem or being a piece of music. So I think that evolution has been crucial for us in order to really come back to what's always been at our core, which is musical practice itself.
Pentacon, 5 cons, 5 conservatoires, is a consortium of internationally oriented conservatoires and schools of music. And the 5 members are my former school, the Schulich School of Music at McGill University, the Royal Conservatory in The Hague, the Sibelius Academy in Helsinki, Finland, the Queensland Conservatorium in Brisbane, Australia, and the Guildhall in London. And in association with that is the Orpheus Institute, where we are right now for a conference, who are a specialist in one of the thematic areas, artistic research.
For me, the big challenge is to describe to the university and to funding agencies how important artistic research is as well. And in order to be able to do that, you first of all have to define what artistic research is, and that's why I came here. To be quite honest with you, that's one of the things that I find at ORCIM and the Orpheus Institute in general, that this focus on artistic research is something that I find very, very interesting, and I'm really hoping to learn a lot from.
Musical creativity is experimentation, so that you have to leave your comfort area and to try something which is unknown and may feel dangerous, or where you feel that you are not very secure, but that is the way how something new can come out.
The danger, if you stick to what you know, is that you produce more of the same. And one of the things I'm trying to do with early music is to get beyond the limits of what I can imagine myself. And so I don't imagine the sound that I want to create. Rather, I investigate what the rules were at the time, and then I put those rules into operation and turn the handle and pursue the rules in a very consequent kind of way and see what comes out. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes the results of that can be something completely new.
And I think I have the back trick, simply as strong as any man in Ghent. Wherefore are these things hid? Why does that not go to church in a galliard and come back home in a coranto? My very walk should be a jig. I would not so much as make water, but in a sink apace. What does that mean? I did think, by the very excellent constitution of thy leg, it was formed under the star of a galliard. Let me see the caper. Higher, higher.
I think musicians have been artistic researchers forever, and the fact that we separated out thinking about music with practicing music by separating conservatoires from music departments in universities here in Europe, I think has done great damage in breaking that particular intellectual tradition, and it's wonderful to see us picking it up again. And while on one side it's very sad that we had to pick it up now, it also gives great excitement. So I think what we're experiencing here at the Orpheus Institute is a very, very vibrant rediscovery of linking thinking to artistic practice. So I think our major challenge for conservatoires is to prepare students for taking active part in the musical arena of the 21st century, and the skills you need in order to survive in the 21st century are really quite different from what you need to survive in the 19th century. So an increased awareness of where they stand within this musical arena and skills to address those things, from reflecting on their art through artistic practices, research, to better professional preparations for a life which is not most likely to be that of an orchestral musician or of a soloist, but maybe of a portfolio career musician who teaches a little bit, who performs a little bit, who writes about music, who organizes music. I think our big challenge is to face the fact that that is the new reality for young musicians, and our eternal challenge will be not to prepare students for the 19th century realities, but to prepare them to be flexible enough to deal with whatever the realities are going to be now and 10 years from now and 20 and 30 years from now.
One of the major achievements of the Orpheus Institute up until now is its contribution to make artistic research in music as a normal part of the language spoken in conservatoires and in university music departments.
The thing that's very challenging for artistic research is, as you know, in Europe, it comes out of a tradition that's based in the conservatoires. And the challenge has always been the bifurcation of the system between conservatories and universities. This is an historical accident that happened in the European system. It's led to many great things over the years, but now the challenge is, how does one bring the concept of practice-based research that's based in composition and performance into an institutional environment and into the society where it's respected as original contributions to knowledge.
What happens to the art making when artistic research becomes part of that process, or what is the difference? What contribution does artistic research make to the art? Why do we need it? And the transformation that happens when moving from one context to the others.
There's an added need for contextualization. It's not just what has happened in history, what has happened in literature, but what do other artists do with this? And now in this global world, that's becoming difficult. I noticed this in this festival for the first time, really, how difficult that is, how much more you need a view on what is happening outside of you. There's all these artists that experiment, that research without, officially researching, so they're not in our view. And then to detect them, that's difficult. So you meet people that say, well, I've done this 15 years ago, or why don't they incorporate this composer that has done something 5 years ago in that continent? How would you know?
Probably I have been an artist researcher for far longer than I realized it. I've always been involved with musicology, and I've always been a composer, and I've always been a performer. I didn't ever think those three domains were separate, but I was induced by circumstance and by the strictures that institutions place upon one to declare myself one or the other in times past. So one of the very nice things about being at Orchim is that I'm given the liberty to integrate those identities, those multiple identities. Orkim, having set this, this agenda to deal with experiment in and through music, we are now entitled, not necessarily obliged, but we're invited to start from scratch and say, okay, well, what is this? And is it necessarily all those things that people have said it was in years past? Now, that piece that I'm doing with Catherine and Damien is nothing that I would have ever had the incentive to probe in a meaningful way were it not for Orpheus. And in that sense, it's starting from scratch, and it's starting from scratch with a very specific and a very, very heightened focus on the research agenda, so to speak. I'm not writing that piece because I want to write a composition. I'm writing that piece because we collectively, as a team, want to find something out. We don't know what it is that we want to find out. That's why it's an experiment and not a test. But we want to find something out, and we hope that the piece will help us do that, will help us find that out.
I think the question of methodology is too often taken for granted. That we say we're asking these questions, we make some work, we write, whatever, that tells us, kind of puts that context around what we're doing. But that sometimes the things that we made are made in the same ways as they might have been anyway. That's not meant as a critical thing. I think it's a political thing, sometimes to do with funding and time. It's also a very difficult question to work out how to construct and how to constantly work through a methodology that is appropriate to the kinds of process questions you want to ask anyway. And there's always an interplay between your goals and how you get there, and those things change in the process of making artistic work.
I am busy with the relationship of physical gesture and sonic manifestation in computer music as something that does not really exist, so it's a potential tool for composition as well. So basically a physical gesture that you imagine can be connected to any sound that you can imagine at the same time. So to establish that relationship that in traditional music performance is basically bound by the mechanical needs of the instrument that you use, I thought that that could be something that can be interesting to observe, to research, to experiment with.
Because of their importance as 20th century figures, Schoenberg, Webern, and Berg have a lot of written work about them and a lot of abstract written work that isn't linked into any kind of heard event or let alone to any kind of performed event. So the performance discussions of these composers are not very good. And that's just because we need more of them. We need more people to be willing to engage in that kind of encounter with this music that is so deeply felt, so painful and so poignant. Well, let's deal with that as musicians and as people who hear and experience the music. Let's not just stay away from it in a kind of safer, abstracted zone, which is enticing and has its own beauties, but isn't the full story of what these works are trying to tell us or how that art is speaking to us.
Independent researches is a nice thing, but to create a research center and to create a research discourse in that research center, you need people that talk to each other, that collaborate, that influence each other, that stimulate each other. And not only from the perspective of a researcher, but also from the perspective of the artist. So they need to collaborate in a way as artists and as researchers, and as artist researchers. And that I think we are very happy to have a beautiful facilities in Ghent with a concert hall, with space for research, with a laboratorium, meeting rooms, everything.
That's the point where Orkin came into my life. And To me, it was the opportunity to bring all these layers, all the information I had gathered as a performer, the physical information, the athletic information, but also all the theoretical tools that I had, to bring them together and to allow for a fusion of all these elements, creating a combination that, in my view, really, in a way, is what I am.
I mean, it's the only research group as a group, a collective body of researchers that acts that way. It has its events, which are unique, the research festival to start with. It helps bringing to the outside world what we just talked about, what artistic research is, how it can be positioned in the academic, scholarly world. There aren't many research festivals yet. So we mingle with other scholars, and I think that's a success.
I think that Orcum has had a fairly rapid evolution in terms of being a group of researchers that gather together to share the evolution of their personal projects into a community that finds common interests and common challenges. And I think that we are now at the tipping point where we are finally able to not only acknowledge what are our common interests and challenges, but find creative ways of tackling those challenges.
So there is a kind of innovative, creative feeling in Orcum. And I think that the co-creative work which is going on and which will even grow more and more, I think there is a potential to bring something to the outer world.
How, for example, Kathleen's project that is based on a text for musicians to sonify, and my own, which is this idea of using sound spatialization as your only creative tool, can come together again by being used as bridges between different musicians, different communities, and different research environments. We have Kim Cuneo, that is a composer and also an electronic musician, and he's going to be playing the hurdy-gurdy and other surprise non-traditional Western instruments. We have Vanessa Tomlinson, that is a percussionist, and she basically is a specialist in composing instruments by means of finding objects of the place where she's going to perform. So I'm really curious about how those two elements connect. Then we have the expanded digital trio. Those are Erica Donnell, Ben Dunker, and Elliot Britton, and they are an electronic trio with electronic drum kit, electric cello, and DJ setting. So it's a completely different thing, and they have been working with the text itself as primary sound material. And we have around Catherine Laws. She will be playing with sound files and the piano, and myself.
All these investigations that are happening here at the centre, Juan's work on silence, I think is very, very important. Again, an area that's very important in Baroque music, the use of rhetorical silence to help make your point. This entire relationship between gestures, the way we move our hands or any other part of our body, and communication through music or through words or just through the movement itself, all this area which is being explored here in an experimental and research context is also very strong in the historical context that I'm working in. So I see a lot of connections there. One of the things that I've enjoyed here, which I think is very important, is at the same time there's this very high level of academic research and artistic excellence. There's also a twinkle of wit and humour in many people's eyes, and I think that's very, very encouraging.
It's great. I mean, it's paradise, right? You come here and you work and you think and you be around other people who think hard about music, and I think it's absolutely wonderful. I love Ghent. I've spent some time here, and because of my association with Zverum and Tone's ensemble, this place is just amazing. I would move here if I could. I mean, what a dream to get to work at a high level and be around other people who are working at a high level and not be sort of pigeonholed in computer music or electroacoustic music or Baroque performance practice. None of those sorts of constraints need apply, and it doesn't seem like they do apply.
We are researchers. All my colleagues are highly skilled researchers, but they are also excellent artists with diverse historical, cultural, and aesthetic backgrounds from diverse countries. They all bring their different perspectives into the processes of art making and of experimenting within those processes.
Artistic experimentation is a nice vehicle to bring the researchers together around one theme, but on the other hand, artistic experimentation, as it is inherent to all musical practices, also serves the underlying agenda of creating a kind of humus layer for artistic research.
This creates a new way of listening, and this is what I'm aiming now at this point, is to challenge our traditional ways of listening and come to new ways of listening to music and finally listening to each other in a different way.
While I don't try and replicate place in performance, I try to allow place to come into me in performance. So through those listenings and walks and meditations that will transform, therefore, the technical aspects and things that I want to bring out in that. For instance, here, I mean, the combination of the trams and the cobblestone walkways, and lots of women wear quite hard shoes, so there's quite bright sounds, and a lot of old bicycles, and they rattle kind of strangely. This is amazing. Just, I mean, when you go out, have a listen. It's so beautiful, this town, to listen to.
For a long time, all of the money, all of the resources were in science, engineering, and medicine. And now what's becoming very fascinating is the way the arts, in and of themselves, but also the way they relate to these other disciplines, are becoming central to people's understanding of the postmodernist, post-algorithmic age. Now that we have machines that can do all of this stuff for us, the interesting question is, how can people actually work together in the way that they should and can do? And artists have the lead position in that.
things that have moved me most deeply are actually people from completely different musical worlds. I would have never thought I'd be thinking about Haydn and Baroque harp playing, but I really am. And I find that a fascinating and very unique kind of experience. Something I don't think I've ever seen before, this kind of pan-stylistic approach to musical research and experimentation.
Larry Polanski, composer, technologist, and artistic experimenter par excellence, gave the keynote address here at the Orpheus Institute. Let's hear what he has to say about some of this.
I've often even been called, like some of my friends, mostly by Europeans, a desert plant. But I grew up in Queens, New York, and the nearest thing I had to a desert was an asphalt schoolyard with a basketball hoop. So perhaps a better way to talk about this way of approaching music is to characterize the compositional attitude as one in which questions are comparably as important as the answers. In my case, I have noticed that just by virtue of my own personality, the answers, when manifest in music, seem to be often quite straightforward. That is, relatively free of cosmetic tinkering. A metaphor I often use for myself in that regard is that it is impolite to tell someone where they live. They already know that. Music should not be a demonstration of competence. This is an interesting example of a lot of what I do, and what I think is a kind of an interesting thing to do is spend a lot more time on asking the question than the answer. Often I'll spend a year or two thinking about some question. I'll walk into a mathematician friend's office, pose it to them, and they say, well, That's easy. But the question is not easy. And that's part of the way I work. The advice I give to composers is stay interested, stay interesting, fight like crazy to keep your integrity and your honesty high. And the moment you start compromising something like that, or speaking in a language that you don't believe in, or doing something for a reason that doesn't feel to you like it's art, or integrity, or ideas, or something, the moment you do something like that, you've lost a little piece of yourself irretrievably. It really is a daily fight to keep yourself doing what you thought when you were 18 years old you should be doing. You're not 18 years old anymore, but you need to keep the mindset of fighting hard for that integrity, that belief in art, in truth, beauty, whatever it is you believe in.
Kinds of things that are central to artists and their concerns about manipulating material are now being disseminated across many other disciplines. Within the arts itself, the challenge is always what is the nature of artistic research. As I've said in many occasions, originality is a feature of the arts. So original contributions to knowledge can and should be normal in the arts.
All I can say really about the evolution of artistic research in the wider community is that the opportunities and indeed the obligations to speak in contexts that are focused on artistic research or to participate in conferences that concern themselves with artistic research, these opportunities seem to be increasing. So from that I conclude there is a growth of interest in the field and a sense of growth of commitment to the field.
Now we are in the moment where we have to take a deep breath and evaluate how we can learn from that rapid growing and see how we position ourselves in the artistic community as well as in the research community. I think that is a challenge that is not only a responsibility, but we have the privilege of owning it because we are somehow in the crack between artists and academic researchers. And I think that because we are in between the two, we have to aim for putting one foot on each and feeling comfortable and eager to participate on both in parallel.
We can do more in the sense that we could make other institutions that are also having an eye on artistic research be more aware that indeed we need these channels of our own as much as the existing channels. So I would encourage other people maybe not to set up more research groups, but to set up a system where this research group can go to and present its findings.
So we've been here in Ghent, Belgium, at the Orpheus Institute, where a group of artistic researchers have been engaged in conversations about the future of artistic research in music. It's a great field and a lot happening, and we hope that there'll be many opportunities for this sort of work to take place in the future.
Even a closing comes to an end. But what will never be closed is our door. Thank you very much.